is Graham Silsbury. I'm a bereaved carer. I've also been involved as a lay member of a research team looking at hospice at home services.
My name is Claire Butler. I'm a palliative care physician of many years' experience and also a clinical professor at the University of Kent. This video may be of interest to anyone, but in particular we're hoping that it will be helpful for people who are considering an end-of-life situation, either facing their own end of life or caring for or supporting someone else who's facing the end of life. We, Graham and I, together have done some research about end-of-life care in England, but we also have experience in our own working and personal lives, myself as a palliative care physician for many years, and Graham as a carer, and also as someone who's taken enormous interest in research in this area. So we're going to talk today together about what sort of situation you might find yourself in, how we may be able to help and support you, what services are available, what questions you may want answered. And between us, through our discussion, we hope that you will find information that will be of assistance to you. It might be useful to start off by thinking a bit about how do people recognise that this is the situation that they're in and that they might need help and information about managing, eventually, death and dying at home.
Yes, and every situation is going to be individual. Sometimes there will be a very immediate diagnosis, normally given to the patient from the medical professional, and that would be something like terminal illness explained to them, and therefore it's a very clear-cut situation that they face. Other times it's a more longer-term, protracted journey, whereby it could well be the partner that's observing issues, the patient feeling basically changes happening to them physiologically, or indeed family members coming in and observing the situation, might not see the couple or the patient very often and be able to observe changes occurring.
I absolutely agree with you. So sometimes people are given a diagnosis, told that dying is now imminent. But quite often, health and social care professionals are not particularly confident or comfortable with these sorts of conversations. And it may, exactly as you described, Graham, be on the background of a fairly long period of deteriorating health and frailty at home. And it may be that it is at some point the patient, with or without the support of their family, who reaches a sense that their life is coming to an end. And then perhaps seeks to confirm that with health and social care professionals. As you say, quite different stories bring people to this point where they realise that they need additional help and support at home. And perhaps particularly what we're talking about are people who have decided through that process that they would prefer to stay at home and eventually to die at home, if possible.
Yes, I think that's a good point, and critical to that is the communication that then goes on. Whether it's that short-term situation that we've described or the long-term situation, communication between the patient and those supporting the patient is absolutely critical to them.
Yes.
To explore and agree what they believe to be going on for them. And establish their responses to that in order to decide how they're going to go about dealing with the situation.
Yes, absolutely. So in an ideal situation, hopefully the person who's suffering from this illness will have someone to support them and to help them on a daily basis, but not always. So some people will be facing this alone, and that is obviously a much more difficult situation for them. But nevertheless, if they prefer to remain and to die at home, then that will be what services will do their best to achieve. Other situations, and the ones that we particularly looked at in our research project, there is someone there on a daily basis caring for the person. And as you rightly say, Graham, the communication between them and the understanding and agreement between them about the situation and what they hope for is crucial. Some people have fantastic communication, others find these conversations much more difficult. And I think one thing it might be useful to say is that there is help. There can be help with communication. It is possible that local services can provide counselling or psychological support that could help people to talk these very difficult things through if they're not finding it easy.
One would hope that in this situation, if that person is alone, they can go to their GP normally would be the first port of call, to express their concerns and get advice, as you say, Claire, as to where they might go for that support that they're seeking.
We've been talking in quite an abstract way about how people reach an understanding of their healthcare situation and recognise that probably the end of life is quite close. And I know that you said sometimes people are given a terminal diagnosis and it's a clear-cut point in time. Other times people reach an understanding themselves, but exactly how does that happen? It can be precipitated sometimes by a hospital admission. So someone goes into hospital very poorly, comes out not a great deal better or maybe worse, and recognises that despite medical interventions, including hospital care, their situation is not improving, and actually they would prefer to avoid going back into hospital again. So that's one possible way in which this situation might crystallise. But it would be useful, I think, Graham, if you're happy, to tell us a bit about your own experience in this.
Yeah, our journey was protracted, and over a long period of time you come to realise that things are changing and they're limiting your life in a number of ways, and you have to start recognising what you're going to do about that situation. So absolutely critical to it is open, loving discussion about the prospect that you're facing and reaching an agreement that you are indeed where you are. So having had that experience with my wife, it was really important to us both that we shared the experience together and agreed that we would remain strong in our commitment to see it through in the best possible way and giving ourselves the best experience on this journey that we were going to have together. So recognising that we weren't professional, we needed to speak to professional people, and we're very fortunate because of her condition with pain management. We were engaged with the hospice at a very early stage, and that gave us the confidence to formulate our approach to this and recognise that we were going to be able to stay together for the longest period of time before actual interventions needed to take place. And for my part, I was very committed to looking after her, and that is just so important. It's, two people need to make that agreement.
Reach that agreement.
So we did that, and we felt very comfortable in that, particularly not knowing how long, having no timeline at that point in time.
Can you remember the moment at which you looked at each other and said, we're coming to the end of this journey?
I think it was more of a triggering than a real. It's very difficult for you to agree that this is you're in the last lap of your life.
Absolutely.
You do need that support and that little bit of guidance that we had from professional people to point out the fact that was appropriate, because it was slow. You know, had it been a rapid deterioration, there would have been
Yes.
a physical trigger.
Yes.
That wasn't available to us. It was a very slow, progressive
Mm.
deterioration. But that change of tack, I think, came from professional input.
Okay, thank you. That's an ideal situation, Graham, where you and the person who's unwell, the two people together, or it may be a wider family group, are able to come together and talk very openly and share their feelings and come to an understanding. That is not always possible. I mean, it may be that some families don't find that sort of open communication easy or possible and may require some help and support with that, which should be available from health and social care professionals. Or it may be a situation where someone's caring for somebody with advanced dementia and it just isn't possible for that person to engage, to get involved in such a conversation. So we're talking about what's ideal, but I guess we want also to acknowledge that some people are in more complicated and difficult situations than that. And that is where we very much hope that we can give you some signposting to the sort of help and support that might enable things to go forward. I think it would be useful to think now about what we formally in sort of health and social care call advanced care planning, which you've already alluded to really, when you spoke about reaching that understanding together, that you are facing death and dying and that you want to do it together and you prefer to be at home. Not everyone will have those same preferences, but essentially that's the situation that we're mostly going to talk about in this video. So what other communication or advanced planning comes up once that initial discussion has taken place?
Yes, so once you've got to that stage, there are a number of things that are going on. For me personally, initially it was just doing the best you can to make the best of a situation. As this journey progressed, you need to recognise that others need to be involved. There could well be family members that could indeed have different views that you need to deal with. So you have to be speaking to them about the decision that you have made.
Yeah.
You want to do your best to keep together in this, to keep as a unit, but then there are lots of third-party interventions as well, and sometimes they're very difficult to actually find in the circumstances that you're facing, because more and more you're involved directly with like patient care, looking after that loved one,
Yes.
and your whole life is starting to change. So you need to make sure that all the relevant parties have been included and informed, and start recruiting your team around you really,
Yes.
as to who's going to be there for you in support of the situation. So there are legal considerations to be made, wills to be thought about. Is this person going to get to the point where they're in a situation where they can't make good judgments for themselves about their health,
Yes.
their property and financial situation, so lasting power of attorney considerations have to be made. And again, seek advice over all this, because there is no expectation on anybody to know these things. You can do all the research that is available apparently through today's technologies, but you're not necessarily going to be following a path that is most useful to your situation. So you must talk about it to as many parties as you can make contact with, and have those conversations, and therefore make decisions about the route that you're going to be following.
Yes. So there's a whole spectrum here that you've talked about, Graham, which is worth just going over again. So there are, if you like, conversations, formal and informal conversations, which you have with your partner, with the person you're caring for, or wider family, and that's all fine. Then there are issues, more formal issues, that actually need documentation, aren't there? Need
Yes.
writing down. So you've mentioned a lasting power of attorney, so that's someone who is legally able to represent you if you're no longer able to manage your own affairs, either financial or health. And that requires a lawyer or some formal intervention to get that sorted. Wills, likewise, need to be properly documented, witnessed and signed and so on. And then there are more specifically health-related documents like advanced care plans, as we would describe them, where it's written down what your preferences are, so that health and social care professionals can refer to something that will give them confidence that they understand and everyone understands exactly what the position is. And I suppose the ultimate is the do not attempt resuscitation CPR document, which causes all sorts of worries and anxieties for people, quite understandably, I think. But at some point probably does need completing in the sort of situation that we're talking about, so that unnecessary, futile, unhelpful, unpleasant interventions do not take place at a time. But equally, it's important for people to understand that all possible care and attention to what is needed at the time is still available, so that symptom management, care, compassion, dignity all continue regardless of whether a person is going to be resuscitated at the time when they die or doesn't want to go into hospital anymore. Nevertheless, our responsibility as health and care social professionals continue.
I think that's a very useful triggering arrangement as well, to have those more intimate discussions amongst the affected people. You know, they can act as opportunities to reinforce the plan that you're going to put in place to progress the journey that you're on.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole range of issues which will be important to people at the time of death and dying, all of which could be documented if that was suitable, and certainly discussed. So I guess there are issues around where would you prefer to be cared for? Do you wish or not wish ever to return to hospital? What other sort of things might come up, Graham, that people would want to specify?
Yes, you're right, Claire. There's a number of issues that could occur. So these are all about the personal preferences, and in order to make that record absolutely clear, the best thing to do is to write them down. So there are matters of belief, spirituality, religion, culture, all these things that could be important to the person that is dying needs to be documented so that people can respect those wishes in the best way possible.
So I wonder if people may be anxious that their wishes and preferences, particularly the cultural and religious ones, may not necessarily be prioritised or recognised by some of the professionals who get involved in care.
This is one of the opportunities that the principal carer has now got. So during that time, a relationship really needs to be formed, a very strong bond between the professional group, the carer and the patient. So we've talked already about the patient-carer relationship. The bond of having that third party coming in, whether it's one person, single point of contact, or whether it's multi-point of contact, that relationship still needs to be a very firm and established bond. So if these issues exist, then they need to be expressed openly, in writing if that's appropriate, and continuously discussed. Because another matter that's going to occur is the changes that are going to go on during the period that this is having to be managed.
Yes. And the importance of this three-part relationship was something that came very strongly out of our research. the relationship and the communication between the patient, the person in the home, their informal carer, family member, and the professionals who are involved in coming in to provide care. And that three-way relationship, which works in each direction, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So information may be being given by the professionals to the family at home, or in the other direction.
Yes.
And it's that three-part communication and trust that is so critical, isn't it?
Yes.
As you indicated, Graham, we're talking about an ideal situation here, and we know what works to promote the best possible outcomes. It's not always going to be that perfect, but nevertheless, let's aim for that. So we've got this three-way communication between the professional team or teams, the carer in the home, and the patient. And that's the way that we want to manage all the things that arise on this journey through caring into dying. But of course, sometimes things will change along the way.
Very much so. What will happen is the circumstances will change physically. There might be material changes that you have to consider with things like your house needs to be completely changed around. There's physicality involved for both the carer and the patient in terms of their care indoors at home. So these have all got to be addressed, and therefore change is going to happen.
Yes.
And that's fine. That is
Yes.
part of it. And all those parties need to be aware that you might have one impression about the way this is going to go, but don't be surprised, because it ain't going to follow that route right the way through so beautifully. It's going to be a changing feast. And everybody needs to accept that.
Yes.
And as soon as it happens, it could be an anxiety as well as a physical change.
Yes.
As soon as that happens, you've got to flag it up.
Yes. And I guess the change may also be a change of preference. It is quite possible that the wishes of the person, the patient, or their carer in the home may change at some point. And the situation may arise where they say, no, at this point we feel we need to come into the hospice, or we feel we need to come into hospital, despite having wanted to stay at home. For one reason or another, our wishes have changed.
Yes. And it was my experience that that was necessary, because what happens is you get an episode, like you get a pain episode or a specific issue that can't be addressed in the home.
Yeah.
And therefore that visit away from the home, away from your desired outcome,
Yes.
has to be interrupted.
Yes.
And sometimes it's going to be the way it is, and
Yes.
that is going to be the conclusion. Other times we can readdress that, a cure, an improvement can be had back into your plan A approach.
Yes.
And that's fine.
Yes. Would it be useful to say something from your own experience as a carer, as well as from our research together, about just what a carer in the home is taking on in this sort of situation?
Yes, it is important. It's a life-changing decision, really, when you're faced with this opportunity, which you hope to be really good and rewarding, but need not necessarily be so. It could be difficult, and it could in fact cause you and the person that you're hoping to be looking after a lot of problems. And so you've got to be wise to that. So in preparation, of course, you're going into something that is new, unique to you, and therefore you need to make decisions about your capacity and your capability. Whether or not you're ready for the opportunity that you're going to get, and whether indeed it's suitable for you. And that only comes through what you know about yourself and what you've discussed between the two of you as to how you're going to manage the situation. Are you, for example, going to be capable of doing the care physically? Are you sufficiently knowledgeable about undertaking specific opportunities that you've got to share that journey intimately sometimes.
Yes.
These are very important things. Again, you need that support. You need to find out from the third parties, the professional people, do they think, are they able to give you the training to undertake these tasks? And then there are other considerations, you know, is your relationship with that person going to be adversely affected because of what you're going to be doing for them to assist the journey? Is the impact on your social life going to change the way you're able to cope yourself? Are you going to lose that free time? Are you going to lose a lot of friends? That social life, is that going to disappear? Is it going to put a big strain on your finances? All these things will have an impact.
Yes.
And you've got to explore them openly and be knowledgeable about what you're going into. And if the overpowering thing is that desire to look after somebody, then you're doing the right thing.
Yes. There are a lot of services, health and social care services out there to support people through this sort of time. And we will talk more about those later in the video. But I think it's worth acknowledging at this point that this may not be right for some people for a whole range of reasons. It may be that either there is no one in the home to provide care, or the person in the home thinks it's not right for them or for their relationship, for them to be that carer.
Yeah, that's entirely right. And once that discussion has taken place and you properly express your views about how you are feeling about the journey that you are now discussing, some people are going to feel it's appropriate to be involved in that care journey. Other people are going to say this is going to be so disruptive to our relationship that it's not something that they would wish to participate in. So that both are equally valid.
Yes, and there may be reasons about physical care, worries about providing physical care or about intimate care for a family member that may not fit with your relationship. There may be worries about the emotional burden that someone just doesn't feel able to take on. All of these are legitimate and important things that we would encourage people to talk about.
Yes. All I would say is explore with that third party that we've already spoken about a lot. Don't be afraid of discussing anything that is either concerning you or you believe you can do. Test that that capability is with you and is agreed that it's something that you should be considering. So use that contact, that professional contact that we've already discussed.
Whether you do or do not decide to undertake this role as a carer in the home, there's a lot to think about, and there are all sorts of elements that it's hard to prepare for. What sort of advice would you give people about the uncertainty of this role and also about how they might take care of themselves?
Yes, Claire, you're absolutely right. You've got to fully appreciate there is an amount of uncertainty in what you're going to be doing, and part of your responsibility to yourself is to take care of yourself. So along with the discussions about the person that you're caring for comes the discussion about how you're going to be through that, and giving yourself the space and time to recuperate. The last thing that you're needing to do in this situation is to run yourself into the ground, as it were. So you need to think very seriously about how much time this is going to be taking, how you're going to get your respite as well, what support that you can look to, because you're going to need your own support processes. Are there friends and family out there who are knowledgeable of the situation that can support you, both in practical terms but also psychological terms? You know, just talking to you about what they're seeing. It's easy to run yourself down to the point where you are physically and mentally exhausted if you're not careful. So be very conscious of yourself in this process, because if you do get yourself into difficulties in any aspect like this, it's going to cause the failure of your objective of care that you're trying to participate in. Yeah.
And with the best one in the world, it may become too difficult at some point. And we've indicated that already.
Yes.
But it's important that people allow themselves to say it's become too much. And even though they had originally that total commitment to care, there may come a time when they can no longer manage that. For a whole range of reasons that are not in anyone's control.
No, that's absolutely right.
Yeah.
And you must be prepared for that, recognising that that's going to lead to the best outturn of the situation. Because if you're in that dilemma of trying to cope and not achieving the desired outcome, both parties, all parties are going to be suffering. So honesty is so important, and recognition.
And this brings us back to our three-way circle of communication, doesn't it? Keeping constantly refreshing information and communication as the story goes along.
Yes. Yeah. Great stages of review all the way has got to be part of the plan, really.
Yeah. I'm just going to summarise what we've talked about so far, Graham. I think we've discussed how people reach a diagnosis and an understanding that they're now looking after or are themselves in the end of life phase and dying and at home is their preference. We've talked about the communication and the understanding that needs to happen in the home between the people in the home and also healthcare professionals, and also about what we call advanced care planning, everyone's wishes and preferences being understood as widely as possible. And we've also talked, and you've talked very helpfully, about what the carer is actually taking on in this sort of situation. I think now we should move on to thinking about what services are available to help and support in the home at this time. And it might be useful just to start off with, if you can remember how you accessed help and support when you were facing this situation with your wife a number of years ago.
Our original contact was classically through the GP. And I think that's how most contacts will be made. It's really helpful when your GP is very supportive of the situation. I think that's important. And also fair to say maybe that, some GPs find it very difficult with people to say, yes, you've got this right. You are in fact on that end of life journey. Yes. So be prepared for discussions about that, and share those discussions that you will have already had with the person that you are needing to care for.
Yes.
And then referrals into hospice services, if that's then appropriate at that stage. Yes. But that will be part of the discussion. And if it's not appropriate at that point, then what point will it be appropriate? You can ask those sorts of questions. That demonstrates your commitment to want to know.
Yes.
If you don't feel you can ask the questions, then you're probably shying away and you ought to re-examine some of the decisions that you think you might have already taken about caring going forward.
Yeah.
So be upfront with yourself, honest with yourself, and ask for that support and information.
Yes.
And that support was given to us through the hospice services.
Yes.
And treatment was very, very helpful. And then the discussion, of course, was how much of this can be delivered in the home environment. Really useful times and inspirational that that opportunity was going to be given to you to manage in the way that you'd chosen was the route for you.
So, in other words, that the support was available for you to care at home.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think an approach through general practice is going to be a very, very common starting point for people and an access point. And the GP, as Graham has described, then has the opportunity or the ability to refer to a wide range of other services which may get involved, depending on the timing and on the needs at the time. And those services will be community nursing services, so district nursing services, the local hospice, who may or may not also include a hospice at home service. And often hospice at home services are linked to hospices, the physical building, but not always. So sometimes they are freestanding services. And these services vary considerably from one area to another around the country. We are not able to give you an absolute template for what the service in your area will look like because they vary. But the combination of your GP and the community nursing services will certainly know what the local landscape in your area is. We should also talk about social care. So social care is available and you can indeed request a carer assessment from your local adult social services department in the local council. And this might be the place where we clarify that services are provided predominantly to the patient, to the index person. But we know from our research into hospice at home that the most successful care at home happens when services are also paying attention to the needs of the carer as a separate, as well as a together with the patient unit. And you've really indicated that, Graham, already in what you've said.
Yeah, that practical support into the house is absolutely critical, and therefore social services involvement in that assessment is critical. If you're able to discuss in advance of what the prospects of the changes that you're going to have to be facing will be, that is really invaluable to recognise that, because then notice can be given of intention and you're not in crisis management mode where things have happened quickly and you're not ready for that. You know, will the person that's being cared for need to come down the stairs eventually and be accommodated down there? Will they need lifting aids, hospital beds, commodes? All those sorts of things, again, are part of the journey, part of the things that need discussing and planning for.
Yeah, so community nursing will give a lot of advice about care and equipment, but as you indicate, Graham, it may be that occupational therapy, physiotherapy will also be involved, and physically equipment services who can be activated by a number of those different professional groups. Let's talk a bit more about the carers, and I think it's sometimes not clear, and understandably so, that nursing colleagues in the community have certain roles and functions, and carers, so healthcare assistants or caring staff, have different functions and responsibilities. They may overlap, and they often work together in teams. But in terms of district nursing, community nursing and hospice nurses will often deal with symptoms, symptom management, advice, with medications, whereas caring staff will be dealing with some of the very practical stuff, which is so critical at this time and increasingly critical as the patient deteriorates. So that is the moving, the handling, the turning, the cleaning, the mouth care. And as we know very well from our research, also a lot of the emotional support day by day.
Mm. Yes, that's absolutely right, Claire. What needs to be undertaken by all those people involved is the entirety of care for the person, and therefore the responsibilities are shared and often they're crossed over. So that's all about that agreement again that you have in the group of you that are involved, and the patient, of course. So the opportunity that the carer has is to provide whatever service they feel that they're enabled to do, that they're capable of doing, and supplying a quality of life. It could be mouth care and turning and washing, and you might need to be trained to do those things, and there's nothing wrong with saying, I would like to do that. Is it possible for me to do that? Can you show me how to do that?
Yes.
And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. It could be as simple as having that time with the person that you're looking after to read to them and giving them the things that they can no longer do for themselves, that has got very little to do with the medical care, as it were.
Yes.
You're just improving life. You're getting the best out of the time that you've got.
Yes. So, I mean, one question that obviously arises out of this discussion is, how is all of this coordinated?
Yes.
Because we're talking about receiving services potentially from a GP, from a community nursing service, possibly from a care agency who may provide carers, sometimes from a community hospice service, which may or may not be enhanced by something called a hospice at home service. And it's often the case that you may well get the care that you need. We hope that you will get all the care that you need, regardless of these organisational boundaries. But it can sometimes get quite complicated.
Yeah, it certainly can, and that's one of the big issues for the carer. They seem to take the lead in this and try and work out which service is the right service to contact.
Yes.
We talk a lot about the desire to just have one point of contact because of the enormity of the busyness that's going on around the situation. Sometimes that's possible and you'll be advised where that is. Other times that's not possible. You just have to persevere and give yourself the space to do that. The ratios of the impact from when you were initially with your GP through your district nursing, they change as the journey goes on. So the amount of involvement towards that end of life journey, that last phase, we hope that the hospice service will be dominating that phase for you and caring. But nonetheless, you might still be getting visits from district nurses and social care providers, as well, of course, your family coming in more and more. As this point in your life approaches, there's almost like an upswelling of emotion that drives people to want to be involved.
Yes.
And that's something that the carer, again, has to start really to control and manage.
Yes.
And not allow it to have an adverse effect on the balance of the situation.
Excellent. Thank you for describing that so well. So hospice at home services particularly, which was the specific focus of our research together, come in all shapes and sizes, and to put it mildly, around the country. They all vary. They have been set up usually with the objective of supporting someone to be cared for and to die at home. That is their focus. As we've said, they may or may not be run through a local wider hospice organisation. Their staffing varies. They may have registered nurses on their staff and healthcare assistants, a balance of the two, and they may well have access to a range of other services within the wider hospice organisation, such as counselling, social work, therapies, etc. And I think, as Graham has already described, as death approaches, it's more and more likely that the hospice at home service, if you have one in your area, because not all areas are covered in exactly this way, will become more and more the lead service and may take on some of this role of coordination that we've talked about. But this will vary, and it's all about the communication, keeping the communication open and frequent as far as possible. Now let's think now about how you get hold of who you need to get hold of when you need them. Graham's alluded to a single point of access. So some areas do run what is known as a hub or a single point of access. So they will aim to have one telephone number for you to contact in these circumstances, and then the person at the end of the phone will then decide what service you need and triage accordingly. Not all areas have that, and you may find that even if there is a single point of access, it doesn't operate 24 hours a day, and you have a different arrangement overnight. So this will be very much locally determined, and you may end up with a list of telephone numbers of different people to contact at different times of day and in different circumstances. And this is a heavy task for the carer to take on sometimes, particularly if an unexpected or emergency situation arises. Who on earth do I ring?
That's a very good point, and often is a real burden on carers to know just who to contact and when to contact them. The important thing, I think, from a carer's perspective is to recognise that whoever you're contacting has got a professional responsibility to help you resolve your problem. So the key thing is to be very clear about the issue that you believe you're facing, why you're making the contact, and why you phoned them preferentially. And if that's an error and it needs to be somebody else that you're talking with, they will advise you on that, have that discussion. They will be obliged to
Direct
do that.
you, yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's probably useful to say that if you end up calling a very general service like, say, 111, to put the context of your situation to them immediately. So I'm caring for X, we're under the hospice, the wish and preference is to die at home, and we're asking for help with X. Because otherwise, sometimes we have come across people whose loved one is unwantedly sent into hospital in these sorts of unplanned situations. So it's all about, as far as you can, in a very difficult moment, giving the background to reassure health and social care professionals of what we're asking them for. And we're not asking them for urgent and interventional care. One of a whole range of issues that will be of concern to people at this time is financial, money.
Yes.
And how they're going to pay for care if that's required, where financial support and advice might come from.
Yes.
Do you have anything you'd like to say about that, Graham?
So benefits are available. Whether or not you're entitled to them will be a matter of how you are placed financially.
Sure.
So it's an area that you need to, again, ask the questions about, whether it's something that you can apply for. As we've already said, this again puts a burden on the carer because it's more work to be done, when actually your primary focus, of course, is the care. You've then got to find that space. Opportunities will come about as your applications are made to see whether, if you're entitled to one allowance, that opens up the gate for other allowances.
Yes.
So it is a journey in itself.
Yes.
You could use citizens' advice in this regard. Your GP will be able to give you a certain amount of information, and of course with modern technologies you can make your own inquiries about what the government is going to see as being appropriate for your circumstance simply by doing searches.
Yes.
So these are opportunities now where you can find out. You can do a lot of research yourself
Yes.
without having to make those contacts. But don't be afraid to ring your council.
Yes.
Rates relief is another thing that
Yes.
will be appropriate, and there are also emergency allowances towards the very end of life. If you're in that financial, that shouldn't be your ultimate concern, should it? It's such a shame
It's a sadness
when you
to-
are
yes.
at that point in this journey
There are other things
that you're
you'd like
still
to-
worried about finances.
Yes.
So again, just appeal to whoever you've got, and very often the professional people coming into your home have that discussion,
Yes.
because they will have had that experience before.
Yes.
You're doing it possibly for the first time.
Yes.
They see it all the time.
Absolutely right. So yes, take advantage of advice from people who are visiting in the home. Adult social services are based at your local council, and as we've said already, will provide a care assessment as well as advice about finances and benefits. If you are involved with a hospice service, they very often have social workers employed as part of the team who can also offer advice and support in this. I think there are sorts of things that you will hear about are attendance allowance, and also I think it's worth specifically mentioning continuing healthcare funding, so that at a point in time where you or the person you're caring for need a lot of physical care, lifting, turning, cleaning, toileting, etc., and you need people coming into the home to help with that. That sort of care may be provided through care agencies in the community, and at a certain point in time, depending on your own financial resources, you may have to pay for that. But also at a certain time, once it is deemed or it is decided that the healthcare needs of the person you're looking after are dominant, then there is a funding stream called continuing healthcare funding, which will then take over the payment for personal care. And so that's something to be aware of and to ask about. Am I or is the person I'm caring for eligible for continuing healthcare funding? And the other buzzword will be attendance allowance. That's another means tested allowance that you may well be eligible for at this sort of time.
So Claire, it could be that in this financial situation that people are going to find themselves in, when they do engage with hospice services, they'll be worried about payment of that.
Yes, I think that is an anxiety for people, because I think people are aware that the majority of hospice care in England is provided through the charity sector, and that also applies to hospice at home services. To my knowledge, there is no hospice service in England that charges. All of these services are funded through charitable donations and fundraising, and provide care in exactly the same way as the NHS, which is free at the point of access. So there will not be charges from your local hospice. It begins to sound as though your home could get very busy during this time.
Yes, it certainly can.
Mm.
And you're entitled to actually manage that situation. It might be something that you're actually accepting of and finding it all very useful and constructive. You may want to plan your day in such a way that you're prepared to have that input from third parties, wherever they're coming from, over a period of time, but then you might want to say, we want quiet time after so-and-so, whatever so-and-so is. Respecting, of course, that the situation that you're dealing with is also subject to change.
Yes.
A crisis might happen, and you might have to break the rule that you've created for yourself and change again. But it's something that can be managed, needs to be agreed as being practical and appropriate. So if that's something that you want to have, If you want to set up a specific part of your house, for example, to look a bit like a hospital wing,
yes,
that's fine and might be a very practical thing to do. Have all the equipment in a particular area, but you've got a great opportunity to also personalise that space, haven't you? So that the patient feels that they are genuinely at home and surrounding them, because that ultimately is their wish.
yes.
That's where they want to be. So let's not change the environment to the point where it might just as well be a hospital.
Yes, good point. I think one of our researchers had a lovely story from interviewing about a couple who said, we just need a bit of time in the evening when we don't have carers and help coming in and out of the house, because that is when we are husband and wife. Eventually, all of this care and attention will end when the person dies at home, if that's where the story ends. And at that point, what advice would we give people when they find that the person they've been looking after has died?
Yeah, such a difficult point in time. The real key thing is not to worry, not to panic, recognise what's happened, make a contact. Whomever you're feeling is appropriate to talk with. A process will then start. So even if you've got the wrong point of contact,
yes.
please don't worry about that. That process will then kick off. And at some point in time, somebody will attend
yes.
to verify the death
yes,
of your life.
Right. That's right. It may sometimes take a few hours for someone to attend, and if this is critical time in terms of your own spiritual or cultural or religious practices, then it's important to communicate that as early as possible, that time is critical. It may be a time when you wish to have a friend or family member with you while you're waiting for someone to attend to verify death, and that will be a very personal choice. And once the death has been verified, at some appropriate moment, according to how you and the people who are with you are feeling, you will contact a funeral director to collect the body and proceed on with receiving a death certificate, registering the death, planning a funeral, many things which you may already have talked and thought about together in the preceding weeks. So how does the home feel at this point?
And it's a very important time now for the carer. As you say, Claire, you hope that those things have been talked about. They're now necessary. You've reached another phase. For you, as the carer, it's actually not the end. It's part of the journey that is now going to continue. And this is life-changing now. You know, something has really happened and needs to take stock and think about how you're going to proceed. So the formality that we've discussed, organising funerals, another work burden really comes on you, completely different set of circumstances now. An initial flood of emotion will come your way, and then it will start to abate to the point where could well finish up in isolation if you're not careful. So consciousness about all these things that are going to happen whilst you're managing the practicality of funeral arrangements, the funeral itself, organising all the things that we've just spoken about from a cultural, religious perspective, and still giving yourself the time to make sure you're well, basically. You know, you're fit for what's going to happen, and the fact that all this support that you've had coming through your household is inclining to disappear.
Yes.
You can still ask for help.
Yes.
And I think that's just so important, and particularly the hospice services recognise this post-bereavement period, and they will give you support for days, weeks, months if it's necessary. It's up to the individual to recognise this, have had that discussion, hopefully even beforehand.
Yes.
But if it hasn't happened beforehand, don't be afraid to make the call and say how you're feeling.
But there's no doubt that even if you do receive help after the death, it's not going to be anything like the same intensity of care and coming and going that you've been experiencing beforehand. So it's going to be quite a change, isn't it?
People respond to this point in time completely differently. Some people will bounce back very quickly into what they would describe as normality. The reality is something has happened to you. It's not normal. You don't know what the impact of that is going to be. Some people will have as much time in reflective mode and find it very difficult to establish their normality, but that will be a new normality because they're living with that experience that they've had.
Absolutely.
And that's absolutely fine.
Yes.
The support will come from various places. We've talked about the professional support that's still out there. Other people will have more support mechanisms. I think the thing to do is to, unless you're absolutely comfortable in your own skin, as it were, isolation, express yourself.
Yes.
And talk to people.
So we've talked about the change at the point at which the person you've been caring for dies. Far less coming and going in the home, all sorts of things to arrange and adapt to. One of which, of course, is that you may still have equipment and medications and goodness knows what in the house, which has gradually adapted to caring and now needs to readjust back.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And of course, we've now got to realise the efforts that are needed to re-establish and collect and control this situation. You might not want this to happen particularly quickly. I think the good news is it might not happen particularly quickly. These things take a long time now to organise. So don't be upset. Just accept that slowly you're going to be able to have equipment collected for you. Social services will do that. You need to contact them. Very often all the contact numbers appear on the equipment itself. So just check that out and make the call. Don't put any priority on when it might be collected because it could be a long time off. Medicines in the house also need to be managed. You will have already understood through your journey how to return certain medicines, but if you've got controlled drugs in the house, you want those collected professionally, so those arrangements have to be made. But again, it's a bit like going backwards, I suppose. Now you can almost go back to your GP and say, how am I going to manage this situation and have these things returned. So,
I mean, you may be asked to return medications to the pharmacy yourself. And yes, you may have to wait for equipment to be collected, and we know that sometimes people can find that distressing.
Yes, they can. And I suppose one of the opportunities that you've got, because what will have happened, this is the larger items of equipment. If it's commodes and frames and things, ask friends to take them away. If it's the hospital bed, hopefully once the arrangements have been made, simply just maybe shut the door and return to what you know as being part of that family home that you loved, together, that you had together, that you lived in. And really key to this is look after yourself.
We all experience bereavement through our lives. And it's a period of adjustment which takes time. It may be that you will need help and support during that time, or it may be that you will get through that period in your own way, with friends, family, community, spiritual, cultural support, the systems that are part of your life. If you do need additional support, then please contact your GP or the hospice service if you had one involved with care. I realise that we may not have answered all your questions. One of the things we've not been able to do is to specify exactly what services will look like in your area or what the points of contact might be for you. And that is because services vary so much around the country and change over time.
We hope you found the video helpful and supportive, and please make real good use of your local services.